The streetlights flickered as the sun dipped below the horizon, and somewhere in suburban America, a child's bicycle lay abandoned at the edge of the sidewalk. The chain still warm, the handlebars slightly tilted, as though its rider had simply vanished into thin air. It was the early 1980s, a time when children were told to be home before dark, when neighborhoods still seemed safe, and when trust was something people carried with ease. But then, one by one, children began to disappear. No screams, no witnesses, no answers. Just silence, broken only by the sound of parents calling names into the night, voices swallowed by the emptiness. Imagine opening your front door and realizing your son or daughter, who had just left minutes ago, would never return. This was not an isolated nightmare. It was a pattern, a spreading darkness that haunted the nation. Posters with tiny faces stared out from telephone poles and supermarket windows. The words "missing" became a constant headline, and fear spread like wildfire across American suburbs. Something was happening, something too large and too strange to ignore, and it left families shattered and a country terrified. Tonight, we are going to step back into that unsettling decade, into the years when childhood innocence was stolen, and the mystery of America's vanishing children took root in the national psyche. This is not a tale of one child or one crime, but a chilling story of countless disappearances that remain unsolved to this day. Before we begin, make sure you subscribe and ring the bell, because here we dive into the darkest stories that history tried to forget. America in the 1980s was a country caught between nostalgia for the safety of small-town life and the creeping realization that danger lurked closer than anyone wanted to admit. Families moved into new suburban neighborhoods lined with cul-de-sacs and white picket fences, believing they had found the perfect place to raise their children. Parents let their kids ride bicycles until dusk, play baseball in empty lots, and walk to school alone, trusting that the world outside their front door was safe. But underneath the glossy veneer of American suburbia, crime was rising at an alarming rate, and whispers of missing children began to ripple across communities. The culture itself reflected the growing fear. News anchors repeated haunting stories of disappearances. Police departments scrambled to explain vanishing after vanishing. And the phrase, "stranger danger," was born, warning children against the lurking shadow of someone who might smile, offer candy, or simply ask for directions. Playgrounds became emptier. Parents began clutching their kids, hands more tightly, and every unfamiliar car parked on the street set off alarm bells in a neighborhood. At the same time, the national media amplified the horror, broadcasting grainy photos of smiling children who were suddenly gone without a trace. Gas stations, grocery stores, and even schools became plastered with missing posters. In some towns, the fear was so pervasive that families refused to let their children play outside, turning once vibrant neighborhoods into silent, watchful communities. It was an atmosphere heavy with paranoia, fueled by the fact that authorities often had no answers and no suspects. Each disappearance added another layer of dread, and the unshakable feeling spread that something sinister was happening, something bigger than ordinary crime. This was not just a collection of tragedies. It was a cultural turning point, where the innocence of American childhood was stolen by a fear that would never fully disappear. It all seemed to begin with a boy whose name would haunt America for decades, Etan Patz. On a warm spring morning in May of 1979, 6-year-old Etan left his family's apartment in Manhattan for the short walk to his school bus stop. He had begged his parents to let him go alone, insisting he was old enough. His mother kissed him goodbye, watched him walk down the street, and then never saw him again. The child's small frame vanished somewhere between his front door and the corner where the bus was supposed to arrive. There were no screams, no witnesses who could say what happened, no clues, but the gnawing emptiness of absence. His photograph, printed on posters and plastered across the city, became the first face of a new era of fear. Etan's disappearance marked the dawn of the 1980s, a decade that would become synonymous with children vanishing without explanation. Parents across New York City were shaken, realizing that the very act of letting a child walk to school had turned into a risk. But Etan's case did not remain a tragic anomaly. It became the first in a chilling pattern. In the years that followed, reports of missing children surfaced in every corner of the country. Their disappearances shared an unsettling similarity. Children vanished in broad daylight, often in familiar, seemingly safe environments, without leaving behind a trace. Investigators combed parks, alleys, and basements, but the evidence was always elusive, as though the children had been swallowed whole by the city itself. Then came Johnny Gosch in 1982, a 12-year-old paperboy from West Des Moines, Iowa. One Sunday morning, Johnny left his house before dawn to deliver newspapers. Hours later, his wagon was found full of papers abandoned just 2 blocks from his home. Neighbors remembered seeing him talking to a man in a car, but no one saw what happened next. Like Etan, Johnny had simply disappeared, and despite frantic searches, police roadblocks, and desperate pleas from his parents, no real answers ever emerged. Johnny's face soon joined the growing gallery of missing children, plastered across America, and his story fueled the terrifying belief that predators were watching, waiting, and striking in the most ordinary moments. By the mid-1980s, parents everywhere were second-guessing the routines of daily life. A simple walk to school, a paper route, or a bike ride around the block had become acts of danger. Each case carried the same unbearable questions. How could a child vanish so quickly, and why did it keep happening again and again? As more names joined Etan and Johnny, a chilling realization took root in the American psyche. The nation was living through an epidemic of disappearances, and no one was safe. The fear spread like a shadow across the nation, settling over towns and cities from coast to coast. By the time the mid-1980s arrived, the image of a missing child was no longer rare. It had become a grim and familiar sight. Families sitting down to breakfast found themselves staring into the eyes of the missing as they poured milk onto their cereal. The Milk Carton Kids campaign was born after Johnny Gosch's disappearance, and soon millions of American households were haunted every morning by photographs of children who had vanished into nothingness. It was an unrelenting reminder that anyone's child could be next. The disappearances continued, each more bewildering than the last. One case that chilled the nation was that of Eugene Martin, another Iowa paperboy who vanished in 1984 under almost identical circumstances to Johnny Gosch. Like a dark echo, his papers were also left undelivered, his presence erased from the world in the span of a single morning. The possibility of a serial predator, or an organized network, became impossible to ignore. Police issued warnings, but the investigation stalled, tangled in a web of dead ends. Theories spread like wildfire: child trafficking rings, satanic cults, or shadowy groups operating beyond the reach of ordinary law enforcement. As the 1980s marched on, communities became fortresses of suspicion. Parents who once allowed their children to roam free now kept them locked indoors. Schools ran safety programs where children were taught to scream no at strangers, to avoid vans parked at playgrounds, to run if anyone tried to lure them with candy or a lost dog story. The term stranger danger became a mantra drilled into young minds. Still, the vanishings did not stop. In Florida, in Texas, in the quiet suburbs of the Midwest, children continued to disappear without witnesses, without evidence, without explanation. The media magnified every case, fueling a frenzy that blurred the line between reality and paranoia. News anchors spoke of abduction rings, of satanic rituals whispered about in hushed tones, of predators who seemed to walk invisibly among ordinary people. Even the safest neighborhoods began to feel like hunting grounds. The pattern was too persistent, too strange, too coordinated to dismiss as coincidence, yet too elusive to solve. Each unanswered question added to the weight of dread pressing down on American families. The sight of a child's face on a milk carton became an icon of the era, but behind each image was a family living a nightmare of uncertainty. No closure, no justice, just the endless waiting and the gnawing terror that someone, somewhere, knew exactly what had happened. And with each passing year, the mystery only deepened, the number of missing children rising, the fear becoming a permanent part of American life. By the mid-1980s, the terror of missing children was no longer confined to news headlines or milk cartons. It seeped into everyday conversations, twisted into urban legends that children whispered to each other on playgrounds, and parents repeated in anxious warnings. One of the most enduring images of that decade was the dreaded white van. Stories spread of unmarked vans cruising slowly past schools, lurking near playgrounds, waiting outside shopping malls. Some children claimed to have seen doors slide open, a hand reaching out, and then nothing but silence where their friends had been standing moments before. Whether these stories were true or the fevered invention of terrified imaginations, they gained a life of their own, merging with the very real epidemic of disappearances to create an atmosphere where myth and reality blurred into one. In neighborhoods across the country, parents began to suspect every stranger. A man walking his dog might be harmless, or he might be scouting his next victim. A woman offering a ride could be a concerned neighbor, or she could be part of something far darker. Children were told never to trust anyone, never to walk alone, never to stop if a car slowed beside them. Ordinary life had been transformed into a minefield of hidden dangers. And behind it all lingered the unnerving thought someone out there was orchestrating this. As the stories multiplied, the cultural fabric of America shifted. News programs featured grainy reenactments of abductions, warning viewers to be vigilant. Talk shows invited parents of the missing, their grief raw and unhealed, to describe the unimaginable void left in their lives. Rumors of satanic cults performing rituals with kidnapped children took hold, fueled by sensationalist reporting and the wider satanic panic that gripped the decade. Some swore the disappearances were linked to underground networks that spanned the country, operating in shadows beyond the reach of police. The fear became so pervasive that even the innocent joys of childhood sleepovers, trick-or-treating, walking to the park, were poisoned by the constant warnings of lurking predators. Stories of attempted kidnapping circulated in every town. A girl pulled toward a van, but managing to escape. A boy lured by candy, but saved by a watchful passerby. Each tale, whether true or rumor, added to the growing mythology of the era. A chilling folklore, rooted not in ancient history, but in the very real present of suburban America. Yet, beneath the whispers and legends, the fact remained unchanged. Children continued to disappear, often without a single clue left behind. The urban legends might have exaggerated the horror, but they reflected an undeniable truth. The 1980s were a time when the line between reality and nightmare grew almost indistinguishable, and the mystery of America's vanishing children only deepened. As the disappearances mounted and the fear thickened, suspicion began to shift toward the very institutions that were supposed to provide protection. Families who had turned to the police for answers found themselves facing silence, incompetence, or outright contradictions. Files went missing. Leads were ignored. Witnesses recanted or were never properly interviewed. Parents who pressed too hard were dismissed as hysterical or accused of fabricating stories. It was as if the truth itself was being buried alongside the children who never came home. In case after case, the pattern repeated. A child would vanish in broad daylight. The authorities would scramble for a few weeks, and then the trail would grow cold. Some officers hinted at connections to organized crime or trafficking networks, but official statements always downplayed the scope, insisting these were isolated tragedies rather than signs of something larger. Yet the similarities between the cases were too striking to ignore. Paperboys disappearing in nearly identical circumstances, children plucked from their neighborhoods without a trace, stories of strange vehicles circling the same blocks where kids were last seen. It was a puzzle with pieces deliberately hidden. And then there were the rumors that refused to die. Whispers of powerful figures involved in secret rings. Children taken not just for ransom or abuse, but for purposes too dark to speak aloud. A few children who managed to escape told wild stories of being held in hidden basements, of others who did not make it out, of adults who were not nameless drifters, but men with wealth, influence, and protection. These accounts should have shaken the country to its core, but instead they were dismissed, the children labeled as liars or mentally unstable, their testimony erased from the record. The more people asked questions, the stranger the silences became. Journalists who tried to dig deeper found themselves stonewalled, threatened, or forced to abandon their investigations. Families reported being followed, phones tapped, and in some chilling cases, warned to stop looking for answers. It created an atmosphere not only of fear, but of betrayal. The sense that forces far more powerful than ordinary predators were at work. Was it incompetence or a cover-up? Were the missing children victims of scattered criminals or pawns in something vast and hidden? By the late 1980s, many parents of the missing were convinced the truth was being deliberately concealed. Their children's names might appear on posters, their faces on milk cartons. But behind the scenes, it felt as though an invisible wall had been built to keep them from ever finding out what had really happened. The result was a gnawing terror that reached beyond grief, the belief that someone, somewhere, was ensuring these mysteries would never be solved. By the end of the decade, the weight of fear and unanswered questions had become unbearable. Investigators quietly admitted what many already suspected. Thousands of children had disappeared across America in the 1980s, and the vast majority were never found. What chilled families most was not just the sheer number, but the patterns that began to emerge when the cases were studied side by side. The Paperboys of Iowa, the vanished children of New York, the unexplained disappearances in small Midwestern towns, all of them bore unsettling similarities. They were young, they were taken in ordinary moments, and they left behind no trace. To this day, many of those cases remain officially unsolved. The shocking realization spread through whispers and late-night television specials. What if these children were not the victims of isolated incidents, but part of something larger, something organized, something designed to remain hidden? Theories of trafficking rings, secret cults, or even shadowy government experiments spread like wildfire. While skeptics dismissed such claims, the families of the missing could not shake the feeling that the truth was being buried deeper than the children themselves. Reports surfaced of supposed safe houses, strange facilities hidden in plain sight, testimonies from children who claimed to have escaped but whose words were quickly silenced. Each revelation added fuel to a fire that no one could extinguish. Perhaps the most haunting detail of all was how quickly the stories faded from public memory. For a time, every household in America recognized the faces of the milk carton children. Their eyes followed families from breakfast tables to news broadcasts, haunting the mundane rhythms of daily life. And then, almost without warning, the campaign ended. The faces disappeared from sight, and the children slipped back into the shadows of history. The silence was deafening, as though someone had decided that remembering was too dangerous, or that the truth was never meant to be found. The climax of the story lies not in a single revelation, but in the absence of one. No bodies, no confessions, no final answers, only the unending void where answers should be. That emptiness is the most terrifying discovery of all, because it suggests that the machinery of disappearance was never truly dismantled. The 1980s ended, the culture moved forward. But the children did not come home. Their names are still on lists. Their faces still archived in old files, and their mysteries remain unsolved, pressing against the collective conscience of a nation that has yet to reckon with them. The story of America's vanishing children in the 1980s is not a closed chapter, but an open wound. It reshaped the way parents raised their kids. It altered the rhythm of ordinary neighborhoods. And it left behind a legacy of fear, that never truly faded. The decade that was supposed to represent opportunity, prosperity, and the golden glow of suburban life became instead a time haunted by unanswered questions and empty bedrooms. Families who once trusted in the safety of sidewalks and schoolyards learned that innocence could be stolen in an instant, and that sometimes the truth is not simply missing, it is being kept from us. When we look back on those years, we are forced to ask ourselves, were these vanishings the work of scattered predators, the tragic outcome of chance encounters with evil? Or was there something more deliberate at play, something coordinated, something so dark that it has remained buried beneath layers of silence and denial for decades? The fact that we still do not know is what makes the mystery so terrifying. And perhaps that is the greatest horror of all, that the children who disappeared left behind not just grieving families, but a trail of questions with no answers. Their faces may no longer stare back at us from milk cartons, but their absence is carved into history, an unresolved puzzle that continues to whisper from the shadows. So the question remains, were these cases ever truly separate? Or do they belong to a single, sprawling mystery that America has never dared to confront? I will leave that for you to decide. Share your thoughts in the comments below, because the discussion does not end here. If you found yourself unsettled by this story, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell, because the world is filled with dark corners and hidden truths, and together we will continue to uncover them, one chilling tale at a time.